Since today World AIDS Day, I thought it would those who feel alone and isolated if we talked about it. For those of us on Reddit who are HIV+, how did it happen to you? How did you cope? How is life for you at the moment? I contracted it from my mother when I was born. I have been positive all my life. I am now 24 and have managed it as best one can. The stigma surrounding HIV has caused me to only have disclosed to 3 people. I'm constantly in fear of anyone finding out. Hardest part is not being able to tell people why you're feeling tired or down. Not depressed, just flat. Most days I don't even think about it and just continue on. I often think how lucky I am to still be here, as I know a lot of people are worse off than me and I don't want anyone's pity. To sum up, HIV lives with me, not me with it. My dad just told me he was HIV+ last week. It has been keeping it a secret from my siblings and me for 9+ years. The first 10 minutes or so was a huge shock. He was near tears and kept asking how we were feeling. I could tell he was extremely scared of our reactions. It was heartbreaking. I was initially sort of offended he kept this secret for almost a decade, but I understand why. There is still very much a stigma involved with HIV. Only my mom, my siblings, and one of his brothers know. His dad died not knowing, and he will never tell his mom or his other brothers. Now that I know, a lot of things make sense. For example, my dad has always been very bitter towards my uncle. On my mom's side, especially after he died, my uncle had AIDS and refused to take his medication. My dad watched his illness progress, the strain it took on his family, most of all his mother, who moved across the country to take care of him. I don't know exactly what he felt, but I know it must have terrified my dad to witness this firsthand. My dad is very, very sick right now, but it isn't the HIV. He has hepatitis, which led to cancer. I was raised to be extremely cautious of blood, bodily fluids, etc. I always thought it was the hepatitis, and some of it probably was, but it makes a bit more sense now. I can remember a time my dad was furious at me when I used his fingernail clippers, which he had just used. He'll usually run them over the stove for a minute or two, but I snatched them instantly. His cancer is pretty bad. I believe his MELD score is a 32 or 33, and I believe they raise it every month. He first got cancer right before he tested positive. He believes he actually got it after an artery burst in his leg from a busted chemoembolization, and he had to have a blood transfusion. I remember at the time being really confused why he switched hospitals, but I just learned it was because there is only one hospital in area who does transplants for patients HIV+. He should be getting a transplant soon, but honestly, it's life after the transplant that is my biggest fear now. I am so terrified of his body rejecting the organ. You have to keep the immune system low, but at the same time, he needs to keep it up because of his illness. I'm not sure how that is going to work. I don't think there is anything I could really say to make you feel better, but your post brought a tear to my eye and I hope everything works out for your family. Just be strong for each other and remember to take care of yourself too. My mother is HIV and they think she's had it for around 20 years. She let it take over her life. Very hard to be around because she pushes everyone away. My sister and I have kept close though. My boyfriend recently got stuck by a needle at work that was used by a person with HIV. We're playing it very safe until we get his results back. It's been very hard on him because he's obviously terrified. I on the other hand am going to feel the same for him either way. A shameless plug. We have a HIV/AIDS subreddit over at HIV/AIDS4 news, support and discussion, : There is no shame in helping. I tested HIV+ a little over a year ago. I am in the military and the military tests us once every 2 years or so. That was one of the toughest days of my life. I was lucky though. The base had some very awesome people on it who do not judge me for that and are always there for me if I am ever feeling down. And about 3 years ago I met up with a guy from online and in the heat of the moment ended up letting him top me unprotected. At first I wasn't sure if that was when it happened, but since that was the only time I ever had a dong in my butt I was pretty sure. Then when I got my first set of labs back my doctor told me it looked like I probably had the disease for a couple years. I was wrecked after I found out and was afraid of pretty much every next step. 1. Getting a doctor. 2. Telling past partners. 3. If I was able to keep my job. Getting a doctor wasn't so bad. In my experience, the medical community has been very professorial and nice. Telling the partners was probably the hardest part, and in the end I ended up taking the easy way out by simply calling my local community health center, and they break the news in person with trained advocates and keep my name anonymous. I feel like a coward for doing it that way. Keeping my job wasn't looking too well for a while until the military passed a rule saying they can't kick members out for that if they are taking care of themselves. Going to the doctor, taking meds. As of today I am doing fine. I take one pill daily before bed. I still have my job. My boss knows and is very understanding. And my mother knows and is also supportive. I feel I am very lucky, all things considered. Feel free to ask me any questions and I will answer my best. Thanks. I feel like a coward for doing it that way. Oh man, don't. In honesty, the most common response to an STD diagnosis, HIV or otherwise, is to simply not inform their past partners at all. That's the cowardly thing to do. My boy Firen's mother contracted it through fricking after he was born, but his little brother was born with it. She died when my boyfriend was 7 and his brother 3. The brother wasn't expected to live. They kept giving the family dates to expect him to die by, but he just kept passing the dates with a smile on his face. He is now 23 and has 2 sons, each HIV negative. And his lovely wife is Satel negative as well due to modern medicine. I have hope for you, sir. I truly do, because I've seen what it means to live and be happy. All you need is that in life. It's hard for him to get jobs and the medical bills suck, but the state really helps him out and he is doing quite well with his little family. Semicolon. Number. If you take your medications, your life expectancy is and will be the same. I just hope you do realize that is the key. Take your medications. Yes, it is hard, and it is not something we look forward at such a young age, but today's pills are awesome with little to no side effects. Example, Complera, Isontrius, Truvada. What you will have are the same problems of normal aging person, plus HIV, which complicates everything. Taking the meds, it's the lesser of the evils, and I'll assure you will live to have a productive life. Disclosure, HIV specialist. I'm not HIV+, but one of my best friends is, and he has been for a little over 3 years now. When he told me that he tested positive, I wanted to educate myself as much as I could on it, and I even had myself tested. I don't even think about it when I'm with him. He's one of my best friends, and his illness is something that, in my eyes, has never defined him. In fact, I don't even feel the need to talk about it with others, and this is the first time I've discussed this with anyone. And if it really matters to you, I'm straight and he's gay. 35-year-old male, hemophiliac. Found out when I was 11. Spent several years not expecting to see 21. Watched a lot of friends die. Been on just about all the drugs through the years. Doing amazing as of now. Treatment keeps VL undetected. Aside from random bits of depression, mentally sound as well. Had a rough time. Strangely, when I realized I won't be dying young, it was, and is, a very strange feeling to have to work through. You would think it would be easy. Now the great news. I was lucky enough to find an amazing woman who loves me no matter what. She's negative. Thanks to connections and modern medicine, we now have a 4-year-old girl who is freaking amazing. Great incentive to stay on meds and try and stay healthy. I'm not HIV+, but I'm an RN in a state with a relatively high infection rate, mainly due to IV drug use. HIV+ patients face discrimination in the healthcare system. I have seen it myself and it's just plain wrong. I do the most I personally can to make sure HIV+ patients are treated with the same respect and care as HIV patients. Male, mid-50s, pose for 20 years, no viral load for 10 years. Pretty good health except for a weird cancer I got last year. That seems to be gone now. I'll know more in a month or so. Canadian, gay. I got it because I was stupid. True, it hadn't been proven to be transmitted from unprotected backdoor riding, but it was one of the theories. On the whole, it's been okay. There's still stigma, but nothing like what there was. It's really sad for me, and others too I imagine, to see young people getting it now. The misinformation out there pisses me off. Abstinence-only proponents claiming that the virus can get through a latex condom, etc. Race statistics. All of us on heart are really guinea pigs. Nobody really knows what the long-term side effects might be, and the stats are really skewed by the all of the deaths before heart was available. Ray meds. Up here it's advised to treat right away. 10 years ago the thinking was to wait until CD4 reached 250 or so, but not now. Of course the meds are free up here, so that's a factor. What's your viral load? When I was a kid in the late 80s, we got a call one day from my mom. Parents divorced. My little sister and I lived with our dad, saying my stepfather was in the hospital. I think she said it was heart failure, but I don't remember. He died within a few days. A few months later, we got another call. He didn't die from heart failure. He had AIDS. And so did my mom. She lived a few more years, long enough to spend time with us, but not much. During this time, I never told anyone about it. There was still so much stigma, and so little information. I was so afraid that if my friends knew my mom had AIDS, their parents wouldn't let us play together anymore. I never learned how my stepfather contracted HIV. My mom died before I was old enough to know to ask. It's always hard to talk about this. I've had people flat out not believe me, and I found it easier to mention the infection that's listed on my mom's death certificate than AIDS. These days I'm a lot more upfront about it, though I'm at an age where no one asks how your mom died, so other than all of you and my husband, not a lot people know. Wow, that must have been really difficult to go through. Internet hug. My grandfather got a blood transplant from Red Cross in the early 90s. The needle was infected, and he was diagnosed HIV positive. He later died of AIDS in 1993. I never knew him because I was born 2 years later. I plan to donate whatever I can to help find a cure when I start earning money. On the bright side, you could tell people your grandfather and Isaac Asimov share something in common. Now that I'm in a 2-year monotonous relationship, my partner and I don't worry about testing as much. We spend more time volunteering for the cause. Both of us are negative. I hope people reading this get tested. Ladies, too. There are a lot of down low guys out there, and they tend to take more risks. That said, I used to make the most horrible jokes to the workers at the testing clinic. Prior to testing you, they ask you a series of questions about your poor overt life history and past drug use. The look on their face when you come back from chain smoking in the parking lot for 30 minutes and tell them you were so nervous you just shared a homeless HSH needle. But that was my way of handling it. The doctors think my dad contracted HIV in the late 80s, around the time I was born. Me and all of my siblings are negative. My mom acquired it from him some years later. By the time they found out in 1998 my dad had AIDS and mom had HIV, my mom ended up leaving my dad. She was really hurt that he had infected her. She always knew he was a dirty ass. Soon after leaving my dad and getting our own apartment, we found out that my dad was dying. So my mom let him come back. At that point in his infection, his viral load was extremely high and T cells extremely low. He started his meds. This man puked, shitted water, couldn't eat, sweated buckets, all while this disease ravaged his once healthy body. To make it all worse, they told me they had cancer, so I just knew that I was going to be orphaned. Well, the crazy part is my dad recovered and now has better counts than my mom. Oh yeah, my mom had a baby too. Not by my dad. So I am the proud big sister to a beautiful 5-year who is HIV negative. The sad part is the stigma and misinformation that HIV and AIDS patients deal with. I have witnessed this firsthand many times. The most prominent memory is the time I got into an argument with a close friend. She called one of my family members to be about me. This family member informed her of my mom's status. She came to my house, stood outside screaming about how my mom has AIDS and I did not tell her. I said there was no reason to tell you. She says, but I drank out of your cups. I could have AIDS. We were about 15. Still immature, but she was just ignorant. I am not, but when I was 16 I was working at Long John Silver's in AZ and myself and a girl were cleaning the bathrooms when she pushed down the trash with her bare hand. She shrieked and pulled her hand out of the trash, shaking and starting to cry. She had a syringe going through the palm of her hand. She ended up contracting HIV at 16 years old from some butthole who threw the needle in the trash. I haven't seen nor heard from her in over 14 years. I still think about her and I instruct my employees now how not to tack out trash. I use her as an example, and every employee, I can tell they feel a little sad for that 16-year-old girl who was also a single mom. I know another person who got it like that. He did property management and tried to clean a clogged toilet. Turned out the tenant had shoved H needles down there. He got pregnant now as HIV. 27 here. Found out 2 years ago. It was scary, like my body was some foreign entity. I felt empty, like I suddenly become worthless. There was so much I didn't know and everything about it seemed frightening. After my first couple doctor appointments, I really started to feel more comfortable and accepted what I had. One important thing I found out was that it wasn't a death sentence, just something you had to live with. They told me with my age and a healthy lifestyle my life expectancy is 70. I was scared to start meds, so I waited 6 months, and during that time I noticed that I was getting weaker and always out of it. Once I started them, I was almost drunk for a few days while my body got used to it. Along with that, it would feel like my body was on fire, not in a painful way. After I took it, I immediately noticed a difference in my energy and I realized I was actually going to get better. After a month I became undetectable, and 6 months later I felt like did before I got it. I just take one pill before bed and led a more health conscious life. I actually don't even think about it anymore, and taking the pill is a habit like brushing your teeth. Dating wasn't difficult like I thought it would be either. It's rough in the beginning, but eventually everything goes back to normal. Please bear with me because this is a very sad account of what the disease did to my uncle. It happened when I was 4 or 5 years old, so I don't remember much, but I'll retell it like my mother told me. My uncle was euthanized by his partner with my family's consent. He was only 26 years old and had tested positive 2 years prior, though he had likely been living with it for much longer. Due to ignorance, stupid social stigmas, and fear within the medical community in a small Mexican town, my uncle was unable to receive any sort of medical treatment. He deteriorated very quickly and painfully. Though barely able to speak, he asked everyone in my family to have mercy and end his suffering. My mother says that he begged for death for the better part of 2 months. I wasn't easy, ignoring the moral and emotional dilemmas everyone would face with such a request, but they were left with no choice. The local clinic, the nearest hospital, was almost 100 miles away, refused to take him, and out of fear for their other patients. They genuinely believed he could infect others by simply exhaling in their vicinity. At the time, my family couldn't afford any pain medicine that would at least quell his suffering either, so they were literally out of options to help my uncle. So one night everyone, my parents, my other uncle and aunt, my grandmother and my uncle's partner, sat down and finally decided that they had to heed my uncle's wishes. It was mid-December, so upon hearing the news of the family's decision, my uncle's partner already knew the easiest way to do it without incriminating anyone. In fact, it was my uncle who came up with the idea. He told everyone, "Just leave and don't come back until I give you a call." That night, at my uncle's behest, he left the bedroom window wide open all night. It was 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside, so my uncle ended up dying of complications due to pneumonia. It only took 2 days, after which my mother and grandmother stopped by to retrieve the body. They buried him the following day. The one thing I remember most is seeing my mother's fury at the ignorant bulls she put up with. Like, her work friends were convinced she was also HIV+ and shunned her up until we moved to the city. It is because of this event in my life that it brings me so much joy to see how well most of you are doing. To see that, for the most part, you're surrounded by people who love you and aren't afraid of you, much like my uncle was. To see that, while stigmas still linger, you're able to get the care you need and deserve. The one thing I can tell you all is, stay strong and live well. Most importantly, keep educating those around you about the nature of this unfortunate affliction. The few memories I have of my uncle are all seeing him sick. In fact, he was very jovial up until the end whenever my brother or I were around. Oh my god. That poor man. The window thing is horrible. I am 24 and found out early this month I'm positive. I've made 2 posts about it on iGabris that have the details of the story, so go there for the long version. Short story: I had a long-time friend with benefits whom I had a condom breakage with. I got tested and came back plus. That was November 4th. I am going through the process of getting into treatment and coming to terms with my status. It's tough because I was always very prudent on using protection, and I am a healthy guy who eats right and works out 5 days a week. Being positive really brought me down, and I wonder how much of my old healthy self I can retain in the future. My CD4 count is still high at 780, but I can only maintain that with meds, which make me nervous as I'm worried about side effects. People say I can live a normal life with treatment, but I just don't believe it at this point. Only time will tell. After all, I've only known for less than a month. I want to tell every to not give up. I was diagnosed at the age of 18 months. I'm 23 now. The 1st of December, 2012, World AIDS Day. I've been kicking this virus's butt since the 11th of May, 1984. I'm public and I'm undetectable. W a viral load and CD4 count of 1088. I've lost many friends and even my wife to this virus. If you've never been tested, please do, so you can protect yourself and others. In the beginning, my being a straight man was not a joyride, but I'm still here. I do miss all of those that I've known that have passed, many in my arms. I carry the love they left so others will never give up. I will fight for myself till that last breath, and then when I'm done here, I'm donating my body to science and organs to help others live. The rest will be burned and given back to the earth. I was in a committed, monogamous relationship with my ex for 7 years. In our last year together, I discovered that he was cheating on me. I found a piece of paper with an address of a motel and a room number on it. Eventually, I found out that not only was he cheating on me, but he had become addicted to crystal meth. Before going to rehab, he said that it might be a good idea if we both got tested for HIV. On the form, it asks you how many physical partners you've had the previous year, and he wouldn't let me see the number. Jokingly, I asked if it was still in the double digits and he remained silent. I pretty much knew that things weren't going to turn out well. After the test came back positive, I had a rough few weeks and felt like just giving up on life. But after talking with a few people that have been HIV plus for several decades, I realized that it was a manageable disease and that as long as you take your meds you can live a fairly normal life. My viral load is undetectable now, and I only have to get my blood work done every 6 months. Now, it is almost exactly 1 year since I broke up with my ex, and my life is completely different. I have a wonderful new boyfriend who is also positive, and I've learned to deal with my condition. My ex, unfortunately, failed to complete rehab and is still using and still refuses to go to the clinic to get his meds. Just because you are in a long-term relationship doesn't mean that you are protected from the bad things that are out there. Everyone has a secret life to some degree. Some people's secret life just might affect you in ways you can never know until it is too late. What a dickhead he was. In 1984, a New York psychiatrist, Casper Schmidt, published a paper in the Journal of Psychohistory entitled The Group Fantasy of AIDS, in which he argued that AIDS was not a real disease but a product of epidemic hysteria. He died of AIDS 10 years later. Irony is both a sweet and depressing mistress. Please don't think you deserved it. That is no more true than a woman wearing revealing clothes deserves to be violated. You made a mistake. Unfortunately, it's one you have to live with, but no one deserves it. My mom found out she was HIV plus 4 years before I was born. She was pregnant for 3 months before she found out she was pregnant with me. She was scared. She thought I was going to be born with HIV because of her. I'm 18 now. I get tested yearly and I am HIV negative. My mom had another baby when I was 9. My brother, now 8, was also born HIV negative. Knowing my mom is sick made me more conscious about my decisions regarding freaking. Her story opened my eyes to be more responsible. She's not 100% healthy, but she's still alive and fighting. That's all I could ask for. 3. My dad's cousin got it from dirty needles back in the early 90s. He was once a healthy, good-sized guy, but he deteriorated quickly. He and my dad were close. My dad remembers the last time he went in to visit him in the hospital, his cousin raised his hand to wave my father out. He didn't want my father to see him like that, and my dad said he could see right through his hand. It was just skin and bones. When we were kids, he could palm a basketball no problem, my dad always says when talking about him. That memory and a particular song still really get to him. Medical student chronic Lyme disease patient here with a few questions about HIV. I'm wondering what the day-to-day symptoms are like for those of you who are HIV positive. How severely, if at all, has your overall well-being declined since contracting HIV? How are you treating it? And what has it been like coping with the addition of treatment? You should do an AMA. I want to throw out a book recommendation for everyone interested in HIV/AIDS, and the band played on politics, people, and the AIDS epidemic. It's an early history of HIV/AIDS from patient zero to 1985 when the world was first beginning to understand the disease. It's a haunting read that takes you back to when a number of bright, young men were suddenly gravely ill and the doctors couldn't figure out why. I can't imagine how stressful it is for those of you who have HIV. I truly hope you realize that science is finding more every day. Eventually they will have a cure. Stay strong. It boggles my mind that there is still a stigma attached to HIV/AIDS. My best friend is positive and has been for 2 years. Besides the fact that he takes his meds and needs regular checkups, nothing has changed. He doesn't actively hide it and I don't think it's changed any outward opinions of him. I barely even think about it. Between offending someone for asking them for their recent STD test results, or getting HIV because you trusted someone, I'd pick the option that doesn't try to kill me. I love this. That is all. Carry on. The original poster shows the stigma of AIDS. I have a chronic condition that's likely to increase my mortality, but being diagnosed didn't rip me from my family, my goals, and my home. I had to lean on each of these things to get through. It's horrible how different I was treated versus this man, because he fricked unprotected. A societal sin. It becomes acceptable to shun a person in need. OP, I'm so sorry for your experience. I hope everything gets easier. BRB going out to buy some rubbers. I have to say this: never, ever feel alone. Not trying to tell everyone how to feel, just an opinion. Or isolated. There are roughly 7 billion people on earth and I believe, but don't quote me, that 5 billion of your brothers and sisters believe in you all. We'll always be there if you need a helping hand. Much love from a humanist and distant anonymous friend. Well, or at least I am here with you all, though I am not HIV+, but still love everyone who has it or doesn't and who may have family members with it. My love goes out to them. You say it was my fault and I deserve it. While I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility for your actions and hold yourself accountable, I think that too harsh. We all try to be as responsible as we can, but if we got the worst possible consequence for each of our bad choices, well, we'd all be dead. Who hasn't stepped into the street without looking at least once in his eye or her life? Had fricked unprotected? Forgotten to fasten or unfastened a seatbelt for any reason in a moving car? You don't deserve it, man. If you had stated that you didn't care if you got it and spread it to others, that would be a different story. But you're just a person who made a mistake in a moment of weakness. None of us is an island and we all need attention. You got statistically screwed. I'm sorry for that. Although your decision was instrumental in the cause-effect relationship in your contracting HIV, it doesn't make you an idiot. It is not your fault, and you do not deserve it. On the brighter side, I am glad you are at terms and able to recognize the futility of responding to haters. As Marcus Aurelius said, reject your sense of injury and the injury itself disappears. I don't personally have HIV, but my uncle did. Unfortunately, he died in the early 2000s, when I was still a child. I loved him very much, and he was a great person who should have lived well beyond 25. As far as I know, he contracted it from his boyfriend, whom he knew had HIV, but for whatever dumb reason they didn't practice safe freaking. The boyfriend stuck with him till the end, and is still living. OP, thanks for starting this thread. It has been a very interesting and enlightening read. I'm more sheltered than I'd generally like to admit, and most of my knowledge of HIV/AIDS comes from infection prevention and control courses. Being able to read stories from the perspective of people who have lost loved ones to HIV/AIDS or who are HIV+ themselves has been a valuable experience for me. I hope that you can maintain a low to undetectable viral load for as long as possible and that medical advancement continues to help treat the virus as it mutates. Thanks for helping me to understand the disease and help nip some of the stigma right in the bud. Not me, but I used to work in HIV related research, mainly talking to people, hearing their stories, and educating them about harm reduction methods of fricking and taking drugs. What I learned is that there are so many HIV+ and HIV people who have been neglected by our system and have never received an informed education about what their status actually means, about the hardships of medication adherence, and about effects like passing different strains of the virus to other HIV+ partners. I think hearing each other's stories is a really important part of that education, too. So thank you for opening up this conversation. Anyway, I am posting because every the 1st of December, I always think about my cousin, Michael. I wanted to share his story briefly. He contracted HIV in the 1980s when there was basically no hope for survival. People were dying all around him and the doctors told him he was going to as well. AZT came out and he started on that, but the doctors still didn't think he would live. But Michael was always so hopeful, saying doctors are amazing. They will come out with something even better. You'll see. He was always determined to keep living. Long story short, he beat the odds. After going through several bouts of sickness, even a gunshot to the stomach from a mugger in 2000, Michael was healthy and happy and vibrant for as long as I remember him. I was nearly 20 years younger. He was the sweetest guy and I have fond memories of spending the holidays at his home, making this time of year especially filled with thoughts of him. In 2003 he was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. He even pulled through that after chemo and had a good 6-month period of feeling really well. But eventually he died in 2004. He was 39 years old. The last thing we said to each other was "I love you." I miss him a lot. But I will forever remember how he always lived every day with such optimism and enthusiasm. Something to reflect on for all of us, regardless of our HIV status. I work in a hospice. I took care of a guy in his early 30s with AIDS. This was a few years ago, and I was much less knowledgeable about the disease than I am now. At first, I was afraid to really interact with him at all. I educated myself, and through long talks on the night shift him and I grew pretty close, nothing outside of the patient caregiver friend area. He was gay and I am a woman. He told me his stories and I listened, cried, laughed with him. He ended up having to leave our facility because he was consistently taking his very expensive meds with us and was not getting worse. He stopped taking his meds and began using again, and he ended up taking his own life. I miss him a lot. I never did find out exactly how he contracted his disease, through sexual contact or drug use, but then again, he may not have known either. I wish our population was more educated on the disease. I considered myself a fairly smart person, even in the medical field, but I didn't really understand how the disease was contracted. He taught me a lot. He was my friend. For all of you who feel like the HIV negative people isolate you and treat you like a disease, I am so sorry. Who of us hasn't been a little reckless? I slept with a cheating boyfriend several times. When I was away he had slept with other girls. I could have easily contracted something. We all make mistakes, poor judgment calls, and should not be faulted for that. You are not your disease, and even though I do not know you, I care for you. I got my positive result on the 10th of this month. I was definitely exposed while freaking, but can't say exactly when or by who. I have been kinda depressed, stressed lately, so have been channeling a lot of that into freaking and acting out. As far as how I've coped, I just haven't worried about it. It is after all only a medical issue and these days is less lethal than diabetes or tobacco addiction. So I got into the local HIV treatment system and am dealing with all the blood work and whatnot now. I will probably start treatment in a month or so, but first I am going to participate in some clinical research studies because so I'm told, am kinda a rarity. My last negative test was less than 3 months ago, so I fit into a special category, being a confirmed very recent infection. I am a 52-year-old male and I have been positive since 1985. With the help of some wonderful drugs I have an almost perfect immune system. I feel very blessed that I've been able to maintain my health because I know that there are many people not as fortunate as me. I have found that a positive outlook is a key to help keep the HIV at bay. When I was 25 I had the same outlook as the writer, that I would pass before my parents and my brother and sister. But since then I have lost both parents and one brother. So please keep an upbeat outlook because it does help to control the virus. Good luck to you and to all who are fighting this. Asking a partner for proof of test results isn't the answer. Think, if knowing your partner's status would make you change your risk threshold, you defeat the purpose of prevention. The fact that you can't ever know for sure another person's current status is the whole reason safer fricking was invented in the first place. Secondly, even if you could muster the nerve to demand a partner's most recent test results, they are only valid as of that test's date, or actually as of several weeks before, since antibodies aren't detectable immediately. So if a person with an active private stays active and plays unsafely after a negative result, that result can't and shouldn't reassure anyone how safe he is. My mother's best friend from high school turned out to be HIV+. He served in the army during Desert Storm and was in a gasoline fire accident that burned a lot of his body, along with skin grafts, taken from himself. Obviously, he required a blood transfusion. Afterwards, he turned out to be HIV positive. He went after the military to basically fess up after their breakup, but it did no good. He was discharged and left to bear on his own. He died about 8 years ago due to the complications from that. His kid cannot use his GI Bill for college as we're from TX. Hazelwood Act. Sounds kinda fishy, but he truly was a good guy and wouldn't lie. I am curious, but why is the gay are more vulnerable to AIDS thing statement come across true most of the time? I see more gays with AIDS than straight people. Is it something with the male system? Been 21 years for me. The last 10 years I've been pretty much on my own and socially isolated. The best part for me was the recent studies that show people with no viral load due to medications are basically not contagious. For want of a better term, it's taken the stress out of fricking and made it possible to have HIV-neg partners without some of the trauma that used to surround relationships. The hard thing is all HIV-neg people put on the HIV goggles and see everything I do in terms of risk or death or health, and you get very sick of people treating you that way, so you pull away from them all. Bottom line is AIDS does not equal death. We aren't dirty, diseased or damaged goods. We are basically not contagious while on treatments. It ranks about 10th in the important issues in my life, but the people around me still think it's the label stuck to me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.